The Professor by Charlotte Bronte. Chapter 1. A Letter to an Old Friend. The previous day, when I was looking over my papers, I found a copy of a letter that was sent by me a year ago to an old school colleague. Dear Charles, when we were at Eton, we had spent most of our time together. You were a sarcastic, observant, and uncaring character. I do not want to draw my portrait, but it was not an attractive one, was it? But I do not know what animal magnetism drew you and me together. We walked and talked so much time out of school hours. When we were talking about our companions or masters, we understood each other, and when I showed an affection or vague love of an excellent object, your ironic coldness did not move me. It has been a long time since I wrote you, and a still longer time since I saw you. It was a coincidence that I saw your name in a newspaper of your county. I began to think about the old days. I don't know whether you listened to me or not, but I wrote this letter. Initially, I had an interview with my uncles, Lord Tynedale and the Hon, John Seacombe. They asked me if I would enter the church. My uncle, the nobleman, asked me the living of Seacombe, and if I would accept if my other uncle, Mr. Seacombe, offered me to become the rector of Seacombe cum Chafe, where my cousins lived. I do not like them at all. I rejected both to the church and to matrimony. I did not want to be a clergyman as well as marry with one of my cousins. After my refusal to their offers, they asked me what I would do. They reminded me that I had no fortune and no expectation. After a second, Lord Tynedale asked me if I would be a trader like my father. I had not thought of being a tradesman, and I did not think that I had a talent and sense for it. But my uncle's style of saying this, which was scornful, made me change my idea. Because I did not like to hear my father's name this way, so I answered instantly that I would follow my father's steps and be a tradesman. They showed no objection, but my verdict brought disgust between us. I shook off the burden of Tynedale's patronage, but I had another burden. I wrote to my only brother Edward, who married a rich mill owner's daughter, and now the possessor of the mill and business that was my father's before he failed. My father had bankrupted short before his death, and my mother lived in impoverishment nearly 6 months. Her aristocrat brothers did not help her, and she had to make a union with CRIMSWORTH, the shire manufacturer. At the end of the 6 months, I was born and she died. My father's relatives took us with my brother Edward till I was 9 years old. At that time, the representation of an important province in our country fell vacant, and Mr. Seacombe would be a candidate for it. My uncle CRIMSWORTH wrote a fierce letter to them, saying they must support their sister's orphan children, or he would say it to public, and this would affect the election. They accepted to pay the expenses of my education, and I was sent to Eton. I stayed there 10 years, and at this time I did not see Edward. When he was 30, he entered the trade successfully. He often wrote me letters saying that there was hostility in the house of uncles. First, I did not understand the reason. Then I figured out that they were angry with my father, who was the responsible person of my mother's situation. I wrote to Edward and said that I wanted to be a tradesman like him if he would give me employment. He didn't give me a direct answer, but said that if I wanted, I could go to the shire. He wanted to see what I would do with work, so I packed my belongings and went north. After 2 days, I arrived in the town of X. There were Mr. CRIMSWORTH's mill and warehouse, which were in Bigben Close. His house was in 4 miles out of that country. I arrived at the gates of the habitation of my brother late in the evening. As I was moving forward, I realized that this house was large. I leaned my back against a huge and tall tree, and I looked through to the crimson hall. Edward is rich, I thought. I knew he did well, but I did not expect that he was the master of a mansion like this. I rang the doorbell, and a servant opened it. Then he ushered me into a room furnished as a library. He informed me that his master went to the X market and would be certainly at home in half an hour. Being left to myself, I took a chair that stood by the fireside and thought by looking at the flames. I felt guaranteed that my brother was with me. I thought about his letters, and I felt an eager that I did not know why. I was impatient while waiting for my brother. At that time, the avenue gates opened and the wheels approached the house. Mr. Crimsworth arrived. I remembered his appearance vaguely because it was 10 years ago. He was tall, tough, young, but now I saw a fine-looking and powerful man with athletic proportions. I realized an air of promptitude and sharpness at first glance. He greeted me with brevity, and he took a seat. "I expected you would have called at the counting-house in the Close," he said. "The landlord of the inn directed me here," said I. "Have you quite broken with Tinnendale and Seacombe?" he asked hastily. "I don't think we will have any further communication. My refusal put a barrier between us," I answered. After a while he rose and invited me for supper. In the dining room Mrs. Crimsworth was waiting. She was young, tall, and well-shaped. Her dress was handsome and fashionable. Her voices are important for me to judge characters, was lively. After our salutation we sat, and I observed her appearance. She had a good complexion, and her hair was quite red. She was playful, and her speech was childish, but soon it came to me that it was rather girlish. She had an effect on Edward and most of men, but not on me. All those beauties will fade as the time passes by. There were 2 pictures in the oak paneling. One was a man, and the other one was a woman. I realized that those pictures were my mother's and my father's. I wished that they had been with me. Then I left them talking and went to my bedroom. I was alone, but there was only you, Charles. Goodbye for now. William Crimsworth. I never got an answer to this letter. On those days he had accepted a government appointment in one of the colonies and was already on his way of his official labors. I don't know what he did after. Chapter 2. The Crimsworth Hall. I began to witness Crimsworth Hall in a fine October morning. I woke up early and walked in the fields that surround the house. There were shire hills and the banks of the river that houses occupied. This prospect that Edward had made no pleasurable emotion to my heart. This was the scene of the life's career. I thought, "William, you are a rebel against circumstances. You are a fool. You have chosen trade." When I returned to the house, my brother was in the breakfast room. He behaved coldly, and I felt the inferiority. Also my physical appearance, thinner, slighter, not so tall, made me feel inferior. I was like a slave, and he was like a master. We went together to the X. We went to the region of mills and warehouses. We reached the place of Edward's work. There were men who were working. We went to my brother's room. We sat, and he turned to me and began abruptly. "Are you here to be a tradesman?" "Yes, I am." "Have you made up your mind on the point?" "Yes." "It is not necessary for me to help you, but here I have a vacant place, if you are qualified for it. What can you do? Do you know anything besides that useless trash of college learning?" "I can read and write French and German." He gave me a German commercial letter. I translated it. "It is well. You know something useful for earning your board and lodging. Because you know French and German, I will take you as a second clerk to manage the foreign correspondence of the house. I will give you £90 a year. It is a good salary, and being my brother, it's not important for me. If I find you stupid, negligent, or idle, I will dismiss you, and I will have any other clerk." In addition to that, he told me to find lodging in X, rather than staying in Crimsworth Hall. I accepted quickly, and he puzzled that because I had no money. How could I do this now without starting to earn money? I said that I could do it. I knew that all I needed was patience. 2 things were certain. I was capable of doing the work of Mr. Crimsworth, and I could earn those wages. He rang the bell, and his first clerk, Mr. Staton, entered. "Mr. Staton, give Mr. William the letters from Vos Brothers. He will translate them," he said. When I sat and began to translate, he was trying to analyze my character by observing me, and I showed him my countenance with confidence. I served Edward faithfully and diligently. I did what was given to me. Mr. Crimsworth tried to find my fault, but he did not find anything. He made Timothy Staton watch me, but he did not find anything. Mr. Crimsworth set Tim for searching my lodging, whether I could afford it, and I have had a problem with my landlady, but they found out that I could afford it, and she was happy with me. Once I had an invitation to Crimsworth Hall for a large party given in honor of the master's birthday. I was invited because it was a tradition of him to invite his clerks to the party. Everything was thought of in the party. Mr. Crimsworth was elegantly dressed. There were pretty girls dressed like stars. I wanted to be introduced with a pleasant girl so I could show my social intercourse. But I was not introduced to anyone. I walked to the picture of my mother. I perceived that I had her countenance. Humph! There is some sense in that face. I turned and saw Mr. Hudson. I said "Good evening" to him with bowing, because he was a manufacturer and a mill owner. I was only a clerk, and he was a master. When I started to leave the place, he asked, "Where are you going?" I made some slight reply, but he insisted for me to stay. First, we talked about my mother's countenance, then my brother. His knowing the fact that we were brothers puzzled me. "Is it your intention to be a tradesman?" he asked. "It was my serious intention 3 months ago." "Humph! It shows your foolishness. You look like a tradesman. You have a business-like face." "Lord made it, Mr. Hudson." Then he went to a girl standing with her mamma, and our conversation was necessarily over. I thought that I made a mistake in the choice of my profession. The work of copying and translating business letters was a tedious task, but the desire of getting my living and proving myself to others made me patient enough. Edward Crimsworth felt antipathy for me. He always tried to find my fault, and he was irritated by everything I had. 2 voices spoke in me. One said, "Your life is tolerable," and the other said, "What can you do to change it?" With these thoughts, I came to my lodging, but it was a fine night, and I chose to take a walk toward the country. When I was walking, I heard a man speaking to himself, and I realized that he was Mr. Hudson. He invited me to his house. Mr. Hudson told me that he did not understand why I had been enduring my brother's bad behaviors, although we carried the same blood, and why I had been living in lodging instead of living in country. He added that I was an aristocrat, and I had a nobleman's features. In addition to that, he stated, I would never be a tradesman because I had no power. I told him good night, and I rushed into the street after answering his questions briefly. First, I was walking angrily, then I relaxed and went to bed. Chapter 3. The Dismissal. Before I started to work, I thought that Edward and I were in equal positions, and he saw me as a disadvantage. I did not want to work, although my inner voice insisted me to work. I felt like a slave. When I was getting prepared to go home at 12 o'clock, he ordered, "You will stay here." "Why?" "Do what I order and ask no questions. You are my servant, and do what I say." "It is enough, Edward Crimsworth. I have given your service, and I have been treated as a slave. Seek another clerk. I stay no longer." "How dare you talk to me like that?" His fury boiled up, and he continued, "What have you been talking all over X about me? Tell me that." I said nothing. "It's a lie. You told everyone that I behaved like a dog to you, and I give you low wages. I wish you were a dog." He talked about public fury towards him, and he understood that Mr. Hudson had arranged it. I stated that Mr. Hudson did it right because he had very bad behaviors toward me, and he had cracked the whip straight over my head. It was broken into 2 pieces. He sent me away with fury. I left the place and walked without knowing myself nearly 2 hours. Then I relaxed and had clean winter air in my lungs. I went to my house, and when I entered my sitting room, I realized an object. It was Mr. Hudson. I was not pleased to see him, and in addition to that, I did not like his attitude. I was irritated. He was waiting to hear thank you from me, because according to him, he rescued me from Edward. But I did not thank him. He asked me why Seacombs did not help me. I replied that I did not talk with them any more. While I was talking with him, I realized my situation. I was penniless, lonely, and not knowing what to do. He wrote me a letter and advised me about traveling. He again waited for me to thank him, but I did not. Then he left. Chapter 4. A New Life. I stored my records of the past in 4-walled cell as pictures. First, I thought Eton where my childhood had passed. The picture was in far perspective, but freshly colored. Second, I thought of X, yellow sky, no sun, and a very dreary scene. Third, I thought about Belgium. It was the best memory that I had kept. It was a fine day, and I would not look at the blue sky or the houses around me. My mind concentrated on one thing. I must have found Mr. Brown. I had his address. Mr. Hudson had given it to me. I found Mr. Brown's house and asked for him. I was admitted and shown into a small breakfast room. When I entered the room, I found myself before him. Mr. Brown was an elderly gentleman with businesslike and respectable looking. I gave him Mr. Hudson's letter. He read it and asked me if he could help me as a friend of Mr. Hudson. After my affirmative answer, I told him that I had been an ex-counting house clerk, and I was seeking a kind of work like this. In addition to that, I stated to Mr. Brown that I needed this work immediately. After some moments of thinking, he suggested a place in Mercantile House at Liege, and he added another work in a bookseller's shop at Louvain. I stated to him that I did not want to leave Brussels. I know a director of a large establishment who is in want of a professor of English and Latin. I thought for 2 minutes, and I accepted it eagerly. "The very thing, sir," said I. "But do you understand French well enough to teach English to Belgian boys?" I answered this question affirmative. "Then I think I can offer you the place of Monsieur Pellet, but come here again at 5 o'clock this afternoon. I will introduce you to him." "But I am not a professor." "Oh, in Belgium, professor means a teacher." I thanked him and left the place. At 5 o'clock I was in Mr. Brown's house again. When I entered the breakfast room, Mr. Brown and Monsieur Pellet were sitting. After Mr. Brown introduced me to Monsieur Pellet, he told me the possibility of work. The salary was fixed at 1,000 per annum. Besides, he provided me board and lodging. In addition to that, I would have some hours each day for me to turn these vacant moments to profitable account. Monsieur Pellet was French both by birth and parentage. He was about 40, and an absolute contrast to Edward CRIMSWORTH. He made me try the pupils in very first day, and I started the English lesson. Then he showed me my room. It was a small room with 2 windows. Monsieur Pellet gave lessons to boys, while Mademoiselle Zoraide Reuter gave lessons to girls. Naturally, I experienced difficult days at the beginning, as every work brings. How could I like Pellet? He did not seem friendly. He was rather cool, and he treated me as he treated his ushers in the house. Once I was shocked that he saw a difference between his ushers and me. He was not married, and his behaviors were weird while he was talking about women. Pellet's house was kept, and his kitchen was managed by his mother, who was a real old Frenchwoman. She told me that she had been beautiful once upon a time. Maybe it had been true, but I saw her ugly. Maybe it was about her ugly clothes. Madame Pellet enjoyed to speak with her cook and housemaids, as well as guests whom I seldomly saw. Once I was sitting in my room, a tea invitation came from Madame Pellet. First I was surprised and could not get the idea of why she invited me. I heard about an old Frenchwoman doing such things to show their love. When I went downstairs, the first view of her seemed to confirm my thoughts. She dressed beautifully and prepared fruit, cakes, coffee, and a bottle of something. Her table was carefully spread. She introduced me to Madame Reuter. Chapter 5. A New Experience. Monsieur Pellet did not object to the proposal made by Mademoiselle. I would give lessons at Mademoiselle Reuter's school in 4 afternoons every week. In the evening I prepared to meet with Mademoiselle Reuter. I debated with myself about whether I should have gone with my daily clothes or with something smarter. Then I thought it would be a waste of time. Actually, though she is the daughter of Madame Reuter, she is an old maid nearly in her 40s. But if she is young and pretty, I am not a handsome man, and no cloth will make me handsome, so I will go as I am. I came to the entrance of the pension. I pulled the bell, and the door was open, and within appeared a passage paved with black and white marble. The walls were painted in imitation of marble, and at the end of the passage there was a glass door, which opened to the garden. I took a glimpse of the garden, but I did not have time to look at it longer. I asked the portress that if her lady was at home. After she stated that she was at home, she ushered me into a large room. The room was furnished well. When I was looking at the objects in the room, Mademoiselle Reuter entered. I did not notice her entering the room. When I heard that she started talking with me, I turned and bowed. I wanted to begin the conversation with her little house and garden. "But you have not seen it yet. Come to the window and take a better view," she said. I went to the window and saw a wonderful garden with lilacs, laburnums, and acacias. I had thought to see a woman with a white cap tied under her chin like a nun's. On the contrary, I saw a woman little and roundly formed, nearly 26 years old. She was probably older than me, but she was still young. In addition to that, she was as fair as an Englishwoman. She had nut-brown, curly hair. Mademoiselle Reuter and I began to talk about business. She stated that she had been thinking about whether she would do well by taking me as a teacher, because I was so young and this subject may have disturbed parents. But then she stated that it was better for her to act on her own judgment, because parents would take control if she acted on their judgments. And then she continued to discuss the subject of terms. She did not bargain, but she tried to find out my expectations. Finally, she'd made me accept 500 francs per year. It was not too much, but I accepted. While we were talking, it was about to be dusk. I did not want to leave the place. I liked the way she spoke to me about business. At last I must have left the place because all things were spoken. Brussels seemed like a very nice place for me, and I took a walk in the streets on that mild April night. The next day I began to wait impatiently for the afternoon to come at Monsieur Pelet's. I wanted to go to Mademoiselle Reuter's place as soon as possible. Time passed slowly for me. I met with Monsieur Pelet at the neighboring door of Mademoiselle Reuter. We had a little chat with Monsieur Pelet, and he mocked me a little bit with his very French, mocking laughs. Having followed the portress, I came to a sort of corridor. A side door opened, and I saw Mademoiselle Reuter's little figure. In daylight, her dress could be seen more clearly, and it suited beautifully to her body. She saw me, and she looked at me sternly. She said good morning in a cold manner. "Monsieur, you will give your lesson in the first class today. Dictation or reading will be best for starting, because they are the easiest forms of communicating instruction in a foreign language." I thought she was quite right. Then we continued to walk side by side. We passed a glass door, which was open to the garden and the playground. While we were walking, she looked at me laterally. I thought that she judged me in a manner of self-government. She opened the door and we entered. I did not look through the glass. I walked directly. I had observed the desk, crayon, and that kind of stuff about me before I looked in the class. I realized that Mademoiselle Reuter had gone and only a teacher remained who guarded over me, and she stood at the half-shaded place. There were girls on the benches from 14 to 20 years old. They had good complexions, large and brilliant eyes, full forms, as well as good features. When I tried to start the lesson, I heard giggling. There were 3 girls in the front desks who were womanly-looking. I learned their names later: Eulalie, Hortense, and Caroline. Eulalie was tall and finely shaped. She was as fair as Dutch people. She had a large, handsome figure. Hortense was stout with an ungraceful form. She had dark brown hair and richly colored complexion. Caroline was little but full-grown. In addition to that, she had very dark hair and eyes. They all followed my eyes. I soon learned that Caroline's mother was a lady. So her mother's situation had reflected Caroline. The 3 of them were the popular ones in the class, and they left the others in the shade. "Take your pens and start writing." The dictation started. The 3 popular girls asked me questions all the time. Their conversations made all the girls laugh, and the teacher provided silence. When the dictation was over, I wanted their papers. First, a little, pale, plain-looking girl came to my desk and left her paper. I learned her name was Sylvie. She had clean writing, and she had few faults. I read the exercises aloud with marking faults. I thanked Sylvie, and she seemed pleased. My lesson passed without interruption, and then the bell rang. When I went to the corridor, Mademoiselle Reuter came to me. "Well, you have given your first lesson. Were you satisfied with your pupils? If you have any complaints, please tell me directly." "A lot of thanks, mademoiselle. I have no problem with my pupils." She looked at me doubtfully, but then her attitude changed from business to a more casual way. We started to talk about weather and town. We were chatting about a lot of topics. I answered all of her little questions. Sometimes she looked from the corner of her eye. I realized that she was trying to find out my real character, my weak points, and eccentric points. In addition to that, she wanted to know where her mind was superior to mine. I liked to play this game with her. But this play ended with the announcement of the dinner. While I was walking, I thought that she talked as if she was the addictive of female characters in novels or romances. But Zoraide Reuter did not have enough passion like the characters in those books. Chapter 6. My Pupils. I had been so busy with talking with Mademoiselle Reuter that I was late for the dinner at Monsieur Pelet's. Being late at meals was not a good thing for the establishment. I entered the establishment and began my dinner. Dinner was over and the boys rushed out for their evening play. I pitied the two Flemish ushers, Kint and Vandel, because they had difficulties in managing the boys and the establishment. "I beg your pardon, monsieur, for having been so late." I followed him to his private sitting room. He ordered coffee for us, and our conversation began. "As far as I know, your lessons are over at 4 o'clock, as in my establishment. But when you came, it was 5:30. What did you do?" "I talked with Mademoiselle Reuter." "If I can ask, on what subject did you talk?" "We did not talk about an exact subject, monsieur." "Did she talk with you in the classroom, before the pupils?" "No, monsieur, we talked in her parlor like you and me had done before." "And Madame Reuter was there, was she not?" "No, monsieur, we were alone." "I think that she was sounding your character." "I thought so, monsieur." "Did she find out your weak point?" "What is my weak point?" "Your sensibility, Crimsworth." "Some women might, monsieur." I was ashamed by his words. "She is young for being a lover, but old for being a mother." "I agree with you, monsieur. By the way, I want my wife to be my wife, not half of my mother." "Then she is a little old for you." "No, if she suits me in other things, it does not matter." Then we talked about her complexion, her hair, her Belgian form, which is full of grace, her features, her little harsh mouth, her pleasant smile, her blue eyes with light-colored lashes. "Do you think she'll ever marry?" "If she finds a suitable match, of course she will get married." Then Monsieur Pelet changed the subject. "What about the pupils?" First, I had thought they were angels, but after I realized that they were not. Especially the three of the eldest were not as good as angels as they had ever been. "Lovely creatures! What a group they have! Eulalie, I know their names, with her smooth hair and ivory brows. Horse, with her bright red lips and mischievous laughing eyes. And Caroline, she has beauty and perfection. What enchanting lips! What marvelous black eyes! Confess, William, some pupils are better than Zoraide Reuter." I understood that he had wanted to infuse some ideas into my mind, and he added that those three beautiful girls would find gentlemen like me who would give them their hearts, hands, and purses. I did not make out his words. Then he laughed a forced laugh, affirmed that he had only been joking. At that moment the bell rang. The play hour was over. Monsieur Pelet stood up and went to give lessons to his pupils without hearing my answer. I had not known so much about the female character before I came to Brussels. When I looked through the class, I saw ethnical diversity. There were students who were French, English, Belgians, Austrians, and Prussians. The majority of them came from the bourgeois families, but there were many countesses also. Besides, they were daughters of 2 generals and of several colonels, captains, and government employees. Also, there were pupils who were Flamanades, genuine aborigines of the country. All of the people looked the same. Their dresses were nearly similar, and in their manners there was small difference. Because of the rule of the establishment, they must have endured to each other and also toward their teachers. There were some exceptions, of course. Quarrels with each other were seldom occurred, but gossiping and backbiting took place. The school forbade close friendship, but having been lonely was seen as annoying. They all had a face with modesty and propriety. Most of them were from Roman Catholic sect. I did not know so many things about this sect, but I realized that there were a good deal of discipline. These girls belonged to the respectable ranks of society. They had been all brought up carefully. Among those girls there were 2 of 3 specimen whom were selected. The first one was Aurelia Koslow. She was half German and half Russian. She was 18 years old and had been educated from 12 years of age. She had been sent to Brussels in order to finish her education. She did not speak English and French fluently, as well as German, which was her native language. She was not regarded as totally ugly, but she had tolerably good complexion. She had a long body, short legs, large feet, tightened and small shoes, small head with her low forehead, very flat nose, very high cheekbones, as well as revengeful gray eyes. In addition to that, her waist was squeezed by corset. She had been in school for 12 years, but she had not learned much both in English and French. She did not write correctly, even German. Her homework was done by fellow pupils. She was not showing any desire to learn. As far as I could understand from her pupil life, she was dirty. Her books and papers were always all around. Also, her hair had gum and grease. Her dress was dirty, too. She was trying to take my attention. When I entered the classroom, she fixed her eyes on me with her half-suppressed laugh. The other girl who sat not so far from Mademoiselle Kosla was Adèle Dronsart. She was a Belgian girl who had heavy form and broad waist, with a short neck and limbs, and she had dear brown color eyes, light brown hair, and good teeth. She should have been about 15. Instead, she seemed to be 20 years old. She was trying to catch my eye all the time. Aurelia and Adèle were in the first division of the class. In the second division of the class, there was Juana Trista. That girl was of mixed Belgian and Spanish origin. She was sent to Europe to be educated. She had large and marked features, though they were rather good. She had a dark complexion with black hair and eyes. She had brutal expressions in class. There was Louise Path, who had the happiest disposition among those girls. She was not well taught and well mannered. The least exceptionable pupil was poor little Sylvie. She was gentle in manners and intelligent in mind. Also, she was sincere as much as her religion permitted. But her physical organization was imperfect. Her weak health was clearly seen. Besides, she did not have her own ideas, and she was under the effect of her religion. There were a few English pupils in that school, and they were divided into two classes. The first one was the Continental English, which had chiefly the daughters of broken adventurers whose debt or dishonor had driven them from their own country. As their parents had been going from one place to another, they did not have a good knowledge about religion. So they were weak in religion as well as morality. The second class was British English. Their characteristics were clean but untidy. I did not encounter even half a dozen during the whole time of my attendance at the seminary. There were 3 teachers, and all were French. Their names were Mademoiselle Zéphirine, Pélagie, and Suzette. Pélagie and Suzette were so ordinary in both physical appearance and thoughts. But Zéphirine was somewhat different in both appearance and thought. She was dry-hearted, greedy, and faithless. The 4th teacher was Mademoiselle HENRI, who came daily to teach needlework, netting, and lace-mending. I did not have time to speak with her, so I could not get the idea of her character. But as far as I observed, she had no authority over her pupils. But she knew her superiority and felt it deeply. It was clearly understood by her manners. Once I caught a very bad cold. During that time, Mademoiselle Reuter was interested in me so much that she invited me to her parlor when she learned about my illness. The next day she sat in the class while I was giving a lesson. At 4 o'clock the lesson was over and she took me to her garden. We would stay in the garden till the students went away. We walked side by side with her in the nice May afternoon. I gave my arm to Mademoiselle Reuter, and I led her to a garden chair. She went on talking to me, and I listened to her with love. Then the bell of her and Monsieur Palais' school rang, and we stood up to go. At that moment I wanted her to pick up a flower for me, and she picked up a branch of lilacs. I was satisfied for the present and hopeful for the future. Chapter 7. My New Pupil. That May day was a lovely one. I sat down in the window seat and leaned out. My window looked down to Monsieur Palais' garden. I began to think about Mademoiselle Reuter. She had such lovely blue eyes with brown hair and white skin. She was beautiful. But only beauty was not enough for marrying. If a girl is so beautiful as well as a fool, it will make no sense after the honeymoon, because she will not understand what I mention. But Zoraide Reuter had tact and judgment. While I was thinking about her, I heard murmurings in silence. I looked down the garden and I saw shades. With the help of the moonlight, I saw Mademoiselle Zoraide Reuter with Monsieur Francois Palais arm in arm, or hand in hand, I forget which. Monsieur Palais insisted on the wedding date, but Mademoiselle Reuter did not give exact answers. Cruel Zoraide, you are tormenting me and made me jealous by having glances with the schoolboy CRIMSWORTH. He is ready to fall in love with you, but he has not dared. If you give him hope, he will dare to say it to you. What do you say, Francois? Do you say CRIMSWORTH is in love with me? So much. Has he told you so? No, but I see it in his face. He is ashamed whenever your name is mentioned. Francois, you are jealous! And she laughed. Then she continued. Truly, he made some attempts on me, but I did not give him any encouragement. I will give no false hopes to a man. Monsieur Palais murmured something that I could not hear. Then she replied, How could I prefer an unknown foreigner to you? Besides, I cannot compare CRIMSWORTH with you either physically or mentally. He is not a handsome man at all. Some people may call him gentleman and intelligent, but for my part—" I could not hear the rest. They were gone too far. I could not sleep because of my fury. I woke up early next morning. I thought about whether challenging with Monsieur Pelet or not. Because I woke up with dawn, I went early to Monsieur Pelet for breakfast. I was happy with that I had opened my window last night and heard those things. Because I had learned the real character of Monsieur Pelet. He smiled to my face, but thought bad things behind me. But Zoraide Ruder? I had learned her real side too. She saw me in the school and greeted me with a charming smile. I passed through, but she came fixing her eyes on me. I showed a careless manner. "I hope you feel better today." "And I, mademoiselle, hope that you took no cold last night in your late walk in the garden." She comprehended quickly, and none of her muscles on her face moved. Only her face was reddened a little bit. She went a little further, and I started my lesson. I watched her while I was giving my lesson. She stood still, and she could control herself so much. Soon she realized that I had been looking at her. There was silence in the class because my pupils were doing their exercises. At that time, the door was opened, and a person entered in and sat down onto the empty bench hurriedly. Mademoiselle Ruder stood up and approached my desk. "Monsieur CRIMSWORTH, the young person who has just entered wants to take your lesson. She is not a student. She is a teacher in my establishment. She wants to qualify herself in your lesson, and asked for my permission. If it is not a problem for me, it will not be a problem for you, will it, monsieur?" "Of course, it does not matter to me. By the way, Mademoiselle Henri has not received a regular education, so she may have problems during lessons. Would you please show your consideration to her inevitable deficiencies before the young ladies, because they are Mademoiselle Henri's pupils?" I approved what she had said. Then I proceeded to collect the papers. When I was passing Mademoiselle Henri, I said, "You have come in too late to take a lesson today. Be more punctual next time." After my words, she put her books and papers into her bag and left the class. Maybe I behaved firmly to her, and maybe I broke her heart. With those thoughts, I finished collecting the papers, and the bell rang. I came a little bit early the next day. When I turned to the classroom door, I heard some noises coming from inside. I did not want to interrupt the lesson of Mademoiselle Henri, so I wanted to wait till the lesson was over. The lesson finished, and I entered it. At the beginning of the lesson, I announced the exam results, which was determined according to the correctness of their works. The list was headed by Sylvie, who was the best and the ugliest pupil of the establishment. The second was Léonie Ledru, who was a lawyer-like girl, and the third one was Eulalie, who was the proud beauty. Celie was looking in front of her when she heard her name as being first. She was always like that, and I had an affection for her. I put my hand on Sylvie's head as an appreciation. I thought that she was going to smile. Instead, she shrank herself from me. It was all about her devotion to her religion. She was like a nun. Eulalie was envious because she wanted to be the first. Hortense and Caroline's names were near the bottom of the list, but they wanted to be first too. I realized that the vacant seat was filled by Mademoiselle Henri. Today I had my glasses so I could see her clearly. She looked young. She was probably 17 years old. She was dressed as the girls in the establishment got dressed. Her complexion was not similar to anyone. I thought that she was not Belgian. Her appearance was different than the rest of the class. I gave a short exercise, and pupils began to write it. Mademoiselle Henri had difficulty in following up and writing. She began to get embarrassed, but I continued, as I did not realize her situation. Even more, I said the words faster. When my pupils finished writing, they gave me their notebooks. I looked at Mademoiselle Henri's paper first. She had a few lines missing and a few mistakes, but I wrote "good" at the bottom of the page and gave it to her. When she read the paper, she smiled without looking at me. After the Whitsuntide holiday, which lasted 3 days, the turn of the second division began. I was passing through the classroom, and I saw that there was Mademoiselle Henri inside. Students were making noise, and she could not stop them. She saw me and looked at me. Her eyes were telling me that I have done my best. If you want, you can blame me. Then she showed her irritation to one of her pupils. The silence occurred in class, but I did not know that if it lasted long. The next day I saw Mademoiselle Ruter talking to Mademoiselle Henri. Mademoiselle Henri seemed reluctant of being there. Mademoiselle Reuter was both knitting and speaking. The class was so big that it was too hard to hear what was said. But it could be understood that the subject was not a good thing for Mademoiselle Henri's flushed face. I heard Mademoiselle Reuter saying, "It's enough, my good friend. I do not want to take the advantage that you hold." I understood that Mademoiselle Reuter warned Mademoiselle Henri in a friendly way. Mademoiselle Henri turned away without reply. There was dissatisfaction and a bitter smile on her face. Then she took her place in the class. It was a reading lesson. I hated it because their accents were so bad and they were destroying my native tongue. Nearly 15 pupils read the paragraph I gave to them so badly, and my nerves could not stand to listen to the 16th. But when the 16th read the paragraph in a clear, correct English, I was amazed. Mademoiselle Henri read it as a real English, but I hid my pleasure. When the lesson was over, I approached Mademoiselle Henri. I took her exercise book out of her hand. "Did you have English lessons before?" "No, sir." "No? You read very well. Have you been in England?" "Oh, no." "Have you been in English families?" "No." The answer was the same. Then I saw her full name from the flyleaf of the book, Frances Evans Henri. At that time, Mademoiselle Reuter told her that she should have kept some order in the corridor. Mademoiselle Henri obeyed and went. Mademoiselle Reuter came to me and tried to open a subject to talk about. "Are you happy with your new pupil, monsieur?" "Yes, she has a very good accent. I have not found out that where her knowledge comes." "And what about her capacity, monsieur? I have fears about it." "I think it is not necessary to fear. I do not know her well yet, but it seems she has a good capacity, mademoiselle." I made an attempt to go, but she insisted about the subject. She told me about her efforts, and she added that she had pitied her. I bid her good-bye and left the place. Her manner toward me changed after I began to treat her coldly. She cried despotism. She tried to win me, but instead I was irritated by her behaviors. She showed me strength as proof of her pride. Chapter 8. I began to know Frances Henri. As the time passed by, I found out Mademoiselle Henri's somewhat remarkable possessions: determination and a sense of duty. She was really capable of applying the study, which had difficulties. I had given her extra works, and she did them eagerly. That is, because of her determination. She liked to learn, but hated to teach. Pupils had power over her, and this made her suffer. One day, I gave homework to the class. It was an anecdote about Alfred tending cakes in the herdsman's hut. Most of the narratives were unintelligible. Sylvie and Léonie Ledru had a sense in their writings. Eulalie wrote with a clever plan, but she added an abridged history of England, which was taken from somewhere else. I wrote on the margin of her writing, "Stupid and deceitful," and tore it down in the middle. Then I saw Mademoiselle Henri's paper, but generally I looked at the papers at home, so I kept it in order to read at home. At home, a great curiosity increased in me. I wondered about her so much. Besides, I wanted to know about her. So I read her paper. It was wonderful. She had a few mistakes, but the subject was unbelievable. How this girl wrote it as if she knew everything about England. She must have had some English roots. I wanted to learn it as soon as possible. I did not write any comment on her paper. I only corrected some of her little mistakes. The next day, I spoke about pupils' papers. I praised some and blamed others. But I did not say anything to Mademoiselle Henri. I saw her eager to hear any comment about her paper. At 4 o'clock, the bell rang and pupils began to go. I sat still and looked at Frances. She was putting her books and papers into her bag. When she raised her head, our eyes met with each other. She bid me good afternoon and began to leave. At that moment, I told her to come. I made her sit near me, and I pointed to her paper. Then we checked her mistakes together. "Your work surprised me, Mademoiselle Henri. I saw some proofs of taste and fancy in it. You should have courage and do not fear in any crisis of suffering, under any pressure of injustice." I saw a triumphant smile in her eyes. She said, "Thank you, sir," and stood up. When I raised my head, I saw all of the boarders were looking with their eyes and mouths wide open, and the 3 teachers were whispering. Finally, I had the opportunity to speak with Mademoiselle Henri. I wanted to ask her how she possessed 2 English baptismal names, Frances and Evans, in addition to her French surname also. Where did she derive her good accent? I did not ask her while we were talking, but I tried to talk with her in every little opportunity. Whenever I approached her, everyone began witness and whisper. It was difficult to speak with one pupil in a group of pupils. I approached her and asked, "Where is your birthplace?" "I was born in Geneva." "You cannot say Francis and Evans are Swiss names, can you?" "No, sir, they are English names. In addition to that, my parents were not Genevese. My mother was English and my father was Swiss." "If your mother was English, why do you not speak English more fluently?" "She passed away when I was 9 years old." "So you forgot her by forgetting her language. I suppose you live with your father then?" "No, my father is dead." "Do you have any brothers or sisters?" "No, sir." "Do you live alone?" "No, I have an aunt. Her name is Julienne." "Do you teach lace mending?" "Yes." "It seems boring. Do you like it?" "No, it is tedious." "Why do you continue then? Why do you not rather teach history, grammar, or even arithmetic?" "But I do not think that I am qualified for these lessons. I have not gone to school, monsieur." "Well, what was your aunt about? She is very much to blame." "No, monsieur, you should not blame her. My aunt is a good woman, but she does not have enough money to send me to school. But I have had many lessons in grammar, history, geography, and arithmetic." "Bravo! But how did you afford it?" "By lace mending, monsieur." "Tell me about this process." "I learned lace mending from my aunt. I learned it quickly, and then I began to repair the old laces in Brussels. I earned a little, but this money allowed me to buy books. I wanted to take English lessons, but I did not find a teacher. But I have a project." "What is it?" "I will go and live in England. I will teach French there." When we were talking, Mademoiselle Ruder called her, and she went with derisive smile on her face. The young Anglo-Swiss liked to learn her mother tongue. I began to teach her the literature. She had some classic books remained from her mother, and she also bought some books with her earnings. When I realized her determination, I decided to give some of my books to her. She was delighted when she saw the books. "Do you know how I admire your determination in learning?" "Yes." "But it is not that only admiring. My praises are too cool." She did not seem happy to hear those words. Besides, she seemed a little bit sad. I got nearer to her. My head was near to hers. As the time passed by, she had changed rapidly. When I first saw her, she had a colorless face, like she gained no joy from life. I did not know her eyes' color when I first saw her, because they seemed to be covered by tears. But now her complexion changed. She had a face like the sun, and her eyes were bright hazel with long lashes. Her face, eyes, body, appearance, everything about her was changed. I discovered that I did my best for Frances. I cherished her starved feelings. In addition to that, I made her feelings visible. All of these were beneficial for her as a teacher also. Her pupils were aware of her joy, happiness, and will in living. They were jealous of the change in her, but they did not understand its reason. Now she had a power amongst her pupils, and they felt this power too. Once upon a time she had been inferior among her pupils, but now she was superior to them. With those beneficial changes in her life, she advanced in English. She began to write better compositions that my admiration was growing day by day. Pupils were not satisfied with that situation. But it was not only pupils who were uncomfortable with the situation. There was one more person, Mademoiselle Ruder. Once, when the lesson was over, she approached and said, "Monsieur, may I take your time?" "Mademoiselle, I am at your service." "Monsieur, I appreciate your attitude toward young pupils. You eagerly teach them many things. But Mademoiselle Henri's situation is different. She is older than the other pupils, and she is a teacher. I know that she has a real ambition in learning, and she has succeeded it, but the love fact in her is inescapable, and it is felt by pupils too. I think literature is not for woman mind, and it may have bad effects on her. Don't you think so?" "Exactly, mademoiselle. Your opinion admits of no doubt." Chapter 9. Feeling Lonely. Then Mademoiselle Henri did not come to class for a whole week. I wondered about her so much, but I could not ask the class because of the gossip. Finally, I chose Sylvie to ask. She was the most sensible one among the class. Sylvie said that Mademoiselle Henri left the school and would not come back again. She added that Mademoiselle Henri gave a speech about her leaving the class. I should have learned her address, so I asked Sylvie, "Sylvie, do you know Mademoiselle Henri's address? because some of her books remained, and I should give them back to her. No, monsieur, but maybe Rosalie, the portress, can give it to you. I went to Rosalie's cabinet. When I asked Rosalie Mademoiselle Henri's address, she told me that she did not know it. I knew that she was lying. Someone wanted her to sell a lie. I saw Mademoiselle Ruder and asked her Mademoiselle Henri's address. Mademoiselle Henri has left your establishment. I presume that she has been dismissed. I wish to talk with you in the garden. We went to the garden as her request. First, we talked about this and that. Later, I directed the conversation to Mademoiselle Henri. I did not dismiss her. No one has ever been dismissed since I came here. We went to the garden chair. She sat on it and told me to sit next to her. I stated that it was Monsieur Pelet's place. I was blunt with her, but I insisted about hearing Mademoiselle Henri. I did not dismiss anyone, but I realized that her health was not well, and I thought it would be better for her to relax for some time. She understood me perfectly and left the establishment. Excellent! So you will have the goodness to give me her address. I cannot, monsieur. She did not give me her address. Probably she has been living in poor conditions and did not want to bring it to light. Her poverty is not important, if her heart is rich, mademoiselle, and I know her roots are rich. Your sentiments are perfectly noble, monsieur. After I realized that I could not learn anything about Mademoiselle Henri, I cut the conversation short and departed. A whole week passed with the absence of Frances, and her absence from school brought me the agony. At the end of the week I went to Mademoiselle Ruder and asked Mademoiselle Henri's address once more. She replied that she did not know, and stated that if I thought she was telling a lie. She added that how she could tell me what she did not know. After her insistency about not giving me Mademoiselle Henri's address, I told her my decision. The term would end soon, and I would quit from the establishment. I did not wait for her comments and left the place. In the afternoon I received a small packet. It contained 4 5-franc pieces and a note in English. It said, Monsieur, I went to Mademoiselle Ruder's establishment yesterday at the time that you were just about finishing your lesson. I asked Mademoiselle Ruder if I could enter the class and speak with you. She said that you were just gone. I thought she should have mistaken because it was not 4 o'clock yet, but I understood that it would be in vain. I put 20 francs in packet. These are the price of your lessons. This money cannot be the full expression of my thanks that I owe you. How I wish to say goodbye to you. I am heartbroken because I am quite separated from you. Soon I shall have no friend on earth. Farewell, monsieur. F.E. Henri. I put the note in my pocketbook and put the money in my purse. Then I began to think. Mademoiselle Ruder told me that she was in poverty, but instead she sent me the price of my lessons. How could she provide the money if she was poor? I wondered all the things about her. I asked the servants about the man who had brought the packet, because there was no address on it. They searched for him, but he had gone. I began to search all around Brussels throughout 1 month, but I did not find a trace of her. I thought about her ideas about England. Maybe she had gone to England. One day I wandered the streets of Brussels, and I saw the Protestant cemetery. I entered. While I was reading the epitaphs on the tombstones, heard some rustling. Then I realized that there was someone who was meditating herself in front of a tombstone. Because I was short-sighted, I approached that person. As I was getting nearer, I realized that the person was a woman. First, the tombstone drew my attention. Julienne Henri, died in Brussels, age 60, August 10th, 18, was written on the tombstone. When I finished reading the inscription on the tombstone, I looked down simultaneously. This woman was Frances Henri. She was sitting very quietly, her elbow on her knee and her head on her hand. It was obviously that she had not changed her position throughout the hours. First, a tear fell when she was looking through the tombstone. Then she began to cry quietly. She was lost in thinking so much that she did not even realize me. When her crying was over, I touched her shoulder gently. She turned quickly, and I saw the light of Frances Evans' clear hazel eyes. She looked straight into my eyes. I heard her wonderful voice saying these words, "My teacher, my teacher!" I loved the moment when she grasped my hand. She was a treasure for me because her situation resembled my situation. She was penniless, parentless, and a source of sympathy. She was my model of truth and honor. I trusted Frances Evans. Besides, I respected her. She stood up, and I drew her arm through mine. It was love. "Well, my pupil, finally I have found you. I have been searching for you for a long month, and I lost my hope, but now I have found you again." "My teacher, have you troubled yourself to find me? I grieved bitterly to be taken away from you. I was sorry for that, because heavier troubles made me forget it." "Your aunt is dead?" "Yes, she died 15 days ago, and she died with full regret because she was thinking about my situation. She said that I was friendless, so I would be lonely when she died. I could not prove that she was wrong. Besides, she wanted to be buried in Switzerland, but I could not fulfill her will." "I guess that she was ill a short time." "Yes, she was ill throughout 3 weeks. I left Mademoiselle Ruder's establishment because of that." "Do you want to return to the establishment?" "Monsieur, one evening when I was at home and I had got my aunt to bed, she came. First, she entered my aunt's room and talked with her. Then she came and sat with me a long time. When she rose to go away, she said, 'Mademoiselle, I am not happy that you left my establishment, but you are a very good teacher that all of your pupils accomplished your lessons, and they do not need any further instruction. My second teacher will teach them as well as she can. I am sure that you will find many schools and families to work with, because you are a very talented person.' And she paid me my last quarter's salary. I asked her whether she planned to dismiss me from the establishment or not. I added that I wanted to hear a blunt answer, but she said that she should always be happy to see me as a friend. Then she said something about streets and weather, and she left my home cheerfully. I laughed inwardly. I had guessed that Mademoiselle Ruder had known Frances's address, but she had chosen to tell me a lie about it. Drops of rain began to fall at that time. I wanted her to go home safely, so I asked her where she lived. After I found out that she lived on Rue Notre-Dame aux Neiges, we walked her home. She asked me to come in when we were standing in front of her door. I accepted, and we went in without getting wet. The room that I entered was small, with a painted floor and a square green carpet in the middle of it. There were a few furniture items, but all of them were neat and clear. I hesitated to go further because I remembered Mademoiselle Ruder's words about Frances's poverty. It was really a poor place, but it was so tidy that it was better than an elegant place. Although I mentioned that it was a hot evening, she was preparing to light a fire. There was a black cat on heart. It was her aunt's favorite. She caressed it and lit the fire. She brought a small kettle, which was exactly the same in old farmhouses in England. While she was preparing the tea garments, teapot, sugar basin, silver spoon, silver tongs, etc., she realized my glances through them. She explained that those garments were 100 years old, and they were left to her by her grandmother, and to her grandmother by her grandmother. She asked me if I felt myself at home. I stated that if I possessed a home, it would have been of my own making, and the task had just begun. I had the feeling of possess her as my wife. I would do what it required to have her as my wife. She washed the plate and the porcelain, and she took a seat opposite to me. I gazed at her unintentionally, and she became embarrassed. As the rain was falling heavily, I could not go home, and I wanted her to bring her English books. She rose and got one of her books and sat on the chair at my side. She began to read, and I corrected her mistakes. I said enough to her because the rain stopped, and I must have gone. I stood up and wore my gloves. "Have you found a job?" "No, monsieur. I have made inquiries everywhere, but all of them asked for a reference. I could not go and ask Mademoiselle Ruder for a reference, because I know that she does not like me. Besides, she does not treat me with honor. She treats me as she likes me, but I know that she does not. She made pupils treat against me, so I will not ask her favor." "Well, how do you live on?" "I have still my lace-mending trade, monsieur. I think I will not starve." "Well, I will pay you another visit. Goodbye for now." I wished to say warm goodbye by kissing her cheeks and forehead gently, but I could not. I really wanted to make her my wife. While I was descending the stairs, I remembered to give her money back. I thought that how I could give her money back, because it may not have been good for her pride. Besides, this money was a burden for my self-respect. I went upstairs hastily, and I knocked on her door. Now I was in her room. "Mademoiselle, I forgot one of my gloves. I must have left it here." She instantly stood up to look for it. As she turned her back, I lifted a vase and put the money under it, and I said that I had found my glove and said goodbye and went out. I walked in that wonderful weather. I went to my establishment. It was difficult for me to sleep. Finally, I fell asleep and dreamed. Chapter 10. My life began to change. In August, the school year was closed till the middle of October. My salary was reduced from £60 a year to £40 a year because I quit from Mademoiselle Ruder's establishment. Instead of earning more, I had chosen to earn less than the previous year. We did not talk much with Monsieur Pelet since the day I had heard Mademoiselle Ruder and Monsieur Pelet's night conversation in the garden. I rejected his coffee and tea invitations sternly. He lost his rival, and this situation made him get bored. Then his invitations ceased. He waited suspiciously for me to attack, but my coolness made both Mademoiselle Ruder and him baffled. This situation continued until the middle of July, and then there was a little change. One night, Monsieur Pelet came late to the establishment, and he was so drunk. He rang the bell disturbingly. It was a chance that students did not hear all of those voices, because their dormitory was far from Monsieur Pelet's home. He thought that it was noon, and he wanted lunch, but it was midnight. He shouted at his servants because he did not find them punctual. His mother told him to go to bed, but he said he wanted to talk with me. I was awake because I had been studying some of my German books. I heard his shouts. I thought that his mother and servant could not manage with him, so I must have gone to him. I went downstairs quickly, and I was amazed of his sight. He looked like mad. I took his arm and made him go upstairs. He wanted to resist me, but he was drunk, so he could not. I made him go to his bed, and then I locked the door behind me. During that time he said something. It was clear that my behaviors to Zoraide made her feel passion for me, and she wanted to make me entangled. However, she was entangled in me. So, Mademoiselle Ruder talked about my youth and nobility to Monsieur Pelet, and that made him furious. The next morning, when he woke up, he did not remember what had happened the previous night. His mother informed him that I had been the witness of his drunken and bad behaviors. He did not mind that, because the iron of jealousy had entered his soul. Sometimes his fierce glances met with mine, and I did not speak with him. We were not friends any more. I wanted to leave that establishment, because I could not live with Monsieur Pelet, who had changed and become an enemy of me. But I did not have a chance to leave on that occasion, as I did not have enough money. Mademoiselle Ruder made Monsieur Pelet feel that I had been a rival of him, but I had not been. In another week, Monsieur François Pelet and Mademoiselle Zoraide Ruder were to be joined in the bonds of matrimony. Amazingly, Monsieur Pelet offered me to continue in his establishment as his ablest assistant and most trusted friend, in addition to raise my salary by an additional 200 francs per annum. I thanked him without giving an exact answer, and I went for walking in order to calm my nerves. It was clearly my dismissal, because Mademoiselle Ruder became Madame Pelet, and she would live in that house, so I should have left there. I knew that if I stayed, Monsieur Pelet would be susceptible of a romantic domestic treachery, so I must have left the Monsieur Pelet's establishment. At that time, I remembered the sight of Frances Henri, who was at my side. I wanted to be with her, so I should not have changed my opinion. I turned and went back to Monsieur Pelet, and I mentioned that I would not accept his terms. I went back to my room then. When I closed the door of my room, I realized 2 letters laid on the table. I thought that the letters might have been an invitation from one of my pupils, because I had no friends. As I laid my hand on them, I became excited, because it was clearly seen that Frances wrote one of the letters. Monsieur, I found out what you had done the very morning after your visit to me. I realized the money that you had left when I was looking for your glove. It is not mine, it is your money. I did not want to send it with letter, because it is heavy and it will be lost. So, when I will see you, I will give it back to you. A week ago, I was sent for by a Mrs. Wharton, an English lady. Her eldest daughter was going to be married, and they wanted me to repair her damaged veil. Sometimes while I was doing my work, Miss Wharton and Mrs. Wharton came and sat with me. They made me speak in English and asked how I learned to speak English so well. Then they inquired what I know besides. Mrs. Wharton brought in a Parisian lady to test the accuracy of my knowledge of French. The result should have been good that the same day they took me in their carriage to Mrs. D.'s, who is the directress of the first English school at Brussels. She had been searching of a French lady to give lessons in geography, history, grammar, and composition in French. Mrs. Wharton recommended me to Mrs. D., and she got me to her establishment. I am to attend 6 hours daily, and she will give me 1,200 francs per annum. You see, monsieur, that I am rich now, and I wanted to share my happiness with a kind-hearted like you. I hope I have written well enough, and do not be too angry at my wrong expressions. Your pupil, F.E. Henri. Having read this letter, I thought about its content for a few moments. Then I opened the other. I know that you are so caught up in adventure that you do not write anyone in England. Thankless dog that you are. So I decided to visit your aristocratic face. In the meantime, I know everything about your affairs, by Brown's letter. You are in adventure with little schoolmistress Mademoiselle Zenoibi, or some such name. Maybe I will win her heart. Never mind, I do not want to, because as Brown said, she is little and stout, the better fitted for a starved-looking lad like you. Yours truly, York Hunsden. First, in a minute, I thought about Hunsden's sarcastic words. Then I turned to the other letter. I was relieved that Frances's excessive labor was taken off from her. Two people whose desires were moderate may live well enough in Brussels on an income which would scarcely afford. If you make money in Belgium, you can save it. This is not possible in England. Some months ago, the boys went on a holiday in which people amused themselves by rowing around in little boats. The boys of our establishment ate and drank so much. Jean-Baptiste Wadenhouten, who possessed a breadth and depth, stepped into the boat, and the boat revolted of his weight and capsized. He began to sink and rise and sink again. I instantly dove and saved him. After this, his parents were not contented with only saying their appreciation to me. His father stated that whenever I needed something, I would have said to him. The conversation was over, and I left there. Then I decided to request appropriate work for me. I went to their home, and a servant opened the door. He stated that they were all out of town, and he did not know when they would come back. I left my card to him and went back. After a week, Mademoiselle Ruder and Monsieur Pellet got married, and they went to Paris for the honeymoon. The next day, I quit the establishment and hired a lodging. I put my books and clothes in their place in the room. I was impatient to go to the Rue Notre-Dame-aux-Neiges. It was a mild September evening, and I had nothing to do. I thought that Frances might be at home, waiting for me. I wanted to be with my pupil. Imagination of her began in my mind. Imagination said, "You should go to her house and take your seat at her side. You should not embarrass her with unusual action or language. Be as you always are. You know her smile when she is pleased, and her looks when roused. She will sit silent with you. You know that she will stand strong against tyranny and injustice, but she likes reason and affection. You can influence her with these. Go and show them." I hesitated about going, but the time could not pass by easily with those thoughts. At that time I heard some footsteps. My door was knocked, and before I invited him, he came in and closed the door behind him. He was Mr. Hunsden. He said, "How are you?" with an indifferent voice, and he put his gloves and hat on the table and seated himself in an armchair. I did not start to talk with him. He presumed that as a game and continued to mock me. He lit his cigar and got a book from my bookcase. He was like at his home in Grove Street, Xshire, England, and I said, "You did not have permission for it, so you will not have it." "It's silly, and it will not make me lose anything. I thought you lived at Pellet's." "I went there first, and I waited for a long time. Then they said that you had left the place." "For God's sake, you left your address. Why did you leave?" "Because Monsieur Pellet married the lady with whom you and Mr. Brown presumed to be my wife." "Oh, so you lost your wife and your place?" "Precisely so." "Have you got a new place?" "No." "Are you on the way of getting a new one?" "No." "That is bad. Did you speak with Mr. Brown?" "No, he served me once very well, and I do not want to disturb him again." "Oh, if you want, I will talk with him tonight." "I beg you will not, Mr. Hunsden. You did me an important service, and I am in debt toward you, so I do not want to add a new item to the account." "I am satisfied if you appreciate my service to you. I know that one day you will realize it. But I propose you not to refuse to take one from any hand that offers it." Very well, Mr. Hunsden. I want to skip that subject. What news from X? Before we talk about X, I want to ask Miss Zenob. Zoraide interposed one. Well, Zoraide is really married to Pele? I told you yes. Hunsden tried to take words from me. He wanted to understand my heart had been broken or not. I did not want it to appear, but he understood it from my expressions. Then he stated, I can see how it is, my lad. Zoraide has married with someone richer than you. You offered her your youth and talents in exchange for her position and money. I do not think you love her, but she chose the money and position too. So she has married with Pele. And now we will talk about X. CRIMSWORTH Hall is sold. Sold? Yes, you know, of course, that your brother failed 3 months ago. What? Edward Crimsworth? Yes, and his wife went to his father's home. What about Edward? Tell me the details. He put himself under the protection of the court. And Crimsworth Hall? Was the furniture sold too? Everything was sold. Were the pictures sold too? What pictures? Crimsworth Hall did not have any special collection. There were 2 portraits, Mr. Hunsden. You can remember one of them, which has a lady. Oh, I know. It was a picture of your mother. If you were rich, you might have bought it. But one day I will change my situation. I will not be in poverty. Who bought it, do you know? How can I know? I did not inquire of the furniture. Now good night. I will go to Germany and come back 6 weeks later. I may come and see you again. After this interview, I did not sleep well. Towards morning, I began to doze. At that time, my door was opened and closed. I thought that a neighbor of mine must have entered mistakenly, and I continued to sleep. When I woke up, I saw a woken packing case in my sitting room. I thought that it might not be mine, but there was my name written on it. I was puzzled, but I opened it. I put it against a chair and took my glasses. When I looked at the picture, I only said, Mother! First 10 minutes, I was trying to calm my excitement, and then I wondered about the person who had brought it for me. There was a note on it, and it was written by Hunsden. His note said that he had been happy to make me happy, and he added that, you said last night that you do not want to add anything to my account. Don't you think I saved you from that trouble? I became angry, and all of my happiness faded away. I thought that I owed nothing to Hunsden. Then I prepared to go to Monsieur Vandenhouten's bureau. He received me with kindness. I was surprised because generally I wasn't in ease with strangers, except him. Monsieur Vandenhouten was rich, respected, and influential. I was penniless, despised, and powerless. I explained my situation openly and with confidence. He stated that he was so happy to help me, but I added that I only wanted information and recommendation from him. Then I rose to go. He showed me great warmth. The next fortnight I struggled with hopes and fears, expectations and disappointments. Mr. Vandenhouten helped me faithfully. He recommended me several places, but my chance did not help me, and all of the doors shut on my face. In the second week of October 18, I had the appointment as an English professor. I was accepted with a salary of 3,000 francs per annum. In addition to that, there would be private lessons. It was added that Monsieur Vandenhouten had recommended me. I was so happy that I directly went to Monsieur Vandenhouten's bureau. I thanked him so much, and he received it with his Dutch calmness. Chapter 11. The Source of Happiness. It was 2 o'clock when I returned to my lodging. I bought something to eat from a neighboring hotel. I was thinking about going to the Rue Notre-Dame-aux-Neiges. Francis would come home at 6 o'clock, and I would wait till that hour. Hours did not pass quickly. When it was nearly 6 o'clock, I went out from my lodging quickly. It was autumn, and the weather began to be chilly. I was wondering about Frances. I had not seen her for 10 weeks, and I had not heard from her for 6 weeks. It was a long time, and I did not know if she had done well or not. I was at the door and climbed the stairs. The lobby was empty, and the doors were all closed. There was silence. Then I heard a voice. I was fascinated. Frances was reading the old Scotch ballad. I entered in hastily, and Frances was just before me. She was walking slowly. I entered in poetry. She was calm. Her eyes were not smiling. Poetry was a special thing for Frances, like the other woman. She did not like to be disturbed. I came forward and said good evening to Frances and took a seat. I saw her papers that she had been studying. I took them, and she brought me a candle. We were the same, master and pupil. Then she sat near me, and I continued to read the poem from where she had stopped. It was hard for me to control my impulses. I held Frances on my knees without deciding before. "Monsieur!" cried Frances, but she said nothing else. I asked her if she wanted to be my wife. First, she did not answer. There was silence. Then we talked a little about it. Then I asked, "Will you want to spend your life with me? You always make me happy. I am happy when you are near me. I know you are very good and superior. Master, I want to spend my life with you." "Very well, Frances." Then I drew her nearer to my heart and took a first kiss from her lips. Afterwards we sat in silence. I did not know and guess what she was thinking. I felt the peace. "Monsieur, I want to continue my employment of teaching. We will both have the same profession. You are making plans of being independent from me." "Yes, monsieur. I do not want to burden you." "But, Frances, I have not told you about my new employment. I have left Monsieur Pelet's establishment and got a new place with a salary of 3,000 francs a year. So it is unnecessary for you to go and get tired giving lessons. You and I will live well. Your life has not been easy, Frances. I want you to rest from now on." She stated that she would be bored so much if she sat at home. Besides, she said she liked an active life. On these terms, I accepted her will of work. I did not know if Frances changed since the time I had first seen her, but she seemed changed to me. Her paleness was gone, and color came on her cheeks. She was a treasure for me. I went to my lodging late at night. I was hungry, and I went directly to bed. But I was with my nightmares again, because I had hypochondria. She had been with me many nights and told me about her home, grave. She had been with me when I was a boy, and we had done everything together. Now fear had been my friend. After 15 days, I was freed from hypochondria, and I began to seek Frances. One fine Sunday in November, we took a long walk. Then Frances got tired, and we sat on one of the benches on the sideway. She told me about Switzerland. When we were talking, Mr. Hunsden passed with his 2 friends. He saw us and bowed to Frances. Frances asked me, "Monsieur, it is apparent that he knows you, but he does not know me. Why did he bow to me?" "He understood the fact between us." "How can you understand?" "I read it from his eyes, and even more I understand that he will want to be introduced to you. Will I bring him to your home?" "Monsieur, if you want, you can bring him." That night, Mr. Hunsden visited me. He thought that Frances had been Madame Zoraide. Because of this, he began his sentence that I should not have boasted. I tried to explain the situation to him because he was in such a hurry. I stated that she had been Frances, a Swiss girl, and one of my pupils. Mr. Hunsden said that she was not beautiful, but had something beautiful in her attitude. He wondered about whether I would marry her, and my answer was affirmative. Then he asked, "What is she doing?" "She's a lace mender." "You can judge your own affairs best. A lace mender may be a good wife as well as a lady, but you should take care because she has no education or fortune." After sitting for a while, he rose and told me good evening without his usual sarcastic tone. He was really friendly and wished me happiness with Frances. I liked his manner and offered him to visit Frances. First, he hesitated, then he accepted. We entered in and climbed the stairs. I opened the door. Frances was sitting and rose immediately. The house was very clean, and it looked like it had been polished. There were flowers in the vase. Mr. Hunsden began to speak French with Frances. I had not heard Mr. Hunsden's French before. They began to talk about England, which was Frances's favorite subject. Then Mr. Hunsden asked, "Do you know English?" "A little." "Well, mademoiselle, you think that England is a nice country, but English people know that it is not as nice as it has been mentioned." "England is your country, and you do not like it?" "Yes, England is corrupt. Lord and king, cursed nation, abuses and prejudices in it as well as pride. Disease and infamy are in every part of it, but luxury is not given up. I was thinking about its good sides. I did not know those sides. There are no good sides, no achievement in industry or discoveries in science. Furthermore, education is not sufficient, and I think you like its historical and poetical associations, but all of them are only a humbug." "Yes, I like them, Mr. Hunsden. You do not give any pleasure to these associations, do you?" "Mademoiselle, I have never seen an association." "Well, why do the continental nations respect England if she is nothing?" "Mademoiselle, I think you cannot see the fact that our gold buys us French politeness, German goodwill, and Swiss servility. Swiss servility? Do you abuse Switzerland to me? I have associations, Mr. Hunsden. Were you born in Switzerland? Of course. So where did you get your English features? I am English too. My mother was English and my father was Swiss. While they were discussing, Frances prepared the table for dinner. I stated that we had not had an intention to stay for dinner, but she insisted. The meal was delicious. While we were having dinner, the discussion between Mr. Hunsden and Frances seemed to be fierce, and I understood that we should have gone. Hunsden rose and said, "Goodbye, mademoiselle. I will leave this wonderful England tomorrow, and I will come back nearly 12 months later, and I will visit you again. Next time I will make you fiercer than today. Meantime, unfortunately, you are going to be Mrs. William Crimsworth. Poor young lady, give the professor benefit of your soul." Then we left. He stated that he did not see Frances as my equal. I answered him that I was glad with her and I wanted her to be my wife. When we came back to his hotel, he turned and said that she was good for me, but not too good for him. He added that he was searching intelligence more than beauty in women. Then we turned our backs and left. Neither said God bless you to each other. However, he would be far away tomorrow. 2 months later, Frances stopped mourning for her aunt. One January morning, the first of the New Year holidays, I took Monsieur Vandenhouten and went to Frances's home. I was surprised to see her all in white, because generally she had been wearing sad colors like black. She was crying, and I had her hand in mine and tried to make her calm. Then we drove all together to Protestant chapel and we got married. We did not go to the bridal trip. I bought a small house and we repaired it. We would live there. Nearly 3 hours later, after the wedding, Frances wore her dress colored lilac and was putting some books on the shelf. I thought about her to make some tea in rational English style. The other days were occupied with my wife and my business. We used to go at 8 o'clock every morning and meet again at 5 p.m. Like this, a year and a half passed. One day, Frances said that she thought she had not worked enough. "Why do you think like that?" "I am not satisfied. You earn 8,000 francs a year, but I am still earning 1,200 francs. I can do better." "Your effort is the same as mine, Frances." "Yes, monsieur, but there is something wrong in my working style." "You want to change? Let's have a walk, Frances, so you will tell me of it." "Yes, monsieur." "Why do you call me monsieur instead of William?" "I cannot pronounce your W. In addition to that, Monsieur Fitzhugh." Minnie, our maid, came and we left. We had been earning much, and we were widely known in schools and families as teachers. Maybe she wanted to have her profession, or maybe she wanted to go to England, her promised land. I did not reject her opinion. I know she did not like to be passive. I said that I was always behind her plans, and I would assist her in every field. She thanked me with her eyes. She was happy with my assistance to her. 10 years passed with our mutual great effort in working. Our school became one of the most popular in Brussels. Our education system, our choice of pupils, made us climb upstairs. Our relation with England grew. Even Mr. Hunsden sent his cousins to our school. Frances became a respectable teacher. She treated her pupils equally. The title was not important for her. In her class there were daughters of an English baronet, heiress of a Belgian count, and an Irish baroness, as well as motherless and penniless but clever girls. We had a boy named Victor in honor of Monsieur Vandenhouten, who had been our trusty and well-beloved friend. Victor was born in the 3rd year of our marriage. Frances had been a wonderful wife as well as mother. In addition to that, she had been a wonderful mistress. After 9 o'clock, she used to leave me downstairs and go upstairs to visit her pupil's chamber. We had worked hard and succeeded. Sometimes we had advice from Monsieur Vandenhouten and Mr. Hunsden. We went to England. Frances fulfilled her dream. The whole year we went to every inch of England, and then we stopped at Shire, where I am writing now, my home. We were in Hunsden's home. He had not married. After his father's death, he gave up the trade, and he wandered all around town and brought visitors from every nation. One day Mr. Hunsden felt something special to an Italian girl, Lucia. He thought that all was real in Lucia, and he asked Frances's opinion about her, and she responded, "I think you do not seriously think to marry with her. You like her originality, her fearlessness, and her energy. You admired her talent and spelled by her beauty." Victor was a pretty child because I was a handsome man, or his mother was a fine woman. He was pale with large dark eyes. His shape was symmetrical and slight, and his health was good. He was serious but not unhappy. He liked reading, and he learned to read an old-fashioned way out of a spelling book. Mr. Hunston gave him a dog, and Victor named it as York. He had a passion with playing animals, and he did not go anywhere without York. One day, Mr. Hunston took York to accompany him to X, and a street dog bit him. Mr. Hunston took York to home and told me the situation. I went into the yard and shot him where he was lying with his wound. Victor saw me and said, "Oh, Papa, you are so cruel. You shot York. I saw it from the window. I will not forgive you." But he would have died in a short time with agony. Shooting was better for him. He might have been cured. You do not try. He's dead. He began to cry, and I took him to Frances, because she could make him tranquil. She told Victor that York did not feel the pain. However, if he were left, he would have much pain. Then he felt better, and came to the library near me and apologized. But the whole year he did not want a new dog. Victor learns fast. He should go Eton soon, and he will be far away from me, his mother and home. I have fears for Victor, but it will be good for his education. I am in my library, and Frances has come to say that the tea is ready. I have a little work which lasts 5 minutes. Frances sat near me and has been waiting for me. Then Mr. Hunston has come and said, "I was at X yesterday. Your brother Ned is getting richer with his railway work. Monsieur and Madame Vandenhouten and Jean-Baptiste will come to visit you next month." Brown said all of the things, and he mentioned Pelé. "Why don't you invite them to Shire? You should see your first flame, Zoraide. Mistress, do not be jealous. Now, Monsieur and Madame, if you do not come to tea, Victor and I will start without you." "Papa, come!"